Welcome to week 5 here in the Coach Poe Show. I'm your host, Coach Poe, and we're back after a week sabbatical as we look at week 5 here in the South Atlantic Conference and Super Region 2. Tonight, I've got a very special guest. I'm joined by Chuck Bitner, D2 football national columnist, and we're here to talk about the South Atlantic Conference, kind of what Super Region 2 is going to look like, and talk about the interesting games that we have coming up this week here in the SAC. So without any further ado, we're going to bring Chuck on. Welcome, Chuck. Thank you for hopping on the Coach Poe Show this week.
Hey, Justin. Happy to be here.
Thank you. Well, let's dive into it, man. I hope you're doing well. Hope you're having a good week. And let's dive right in. We're going to start first with the Mountain Division, okay? You look at that. You've got Mars Hill and Tusculum. Both are 2-0 in the South Atlantic Conference. And everyone else kind of in the mountain side of the bracket doesn't have a win yet in conference play. Are you surprised at all with what we've seen so far this early, just finishing up 4 weeks of the regular season?
Well, after week 2, it looked like the race in the Mountain Division might be really, really competitive because we kind of suspected the Tusculum would recover. They had a tough start, but we kind of suspected they would recover and be okay. We didn't really know what to think of Carson, Newman. We knew Mars Hill was going to be good. But then behind them, Emory and Henry had a really good start to the year with a 2-0 start. So all of a sudden, we have to start paying attention to them. Maybe they're going to be a factor in that division. So I think by the time we start to see this play out a little bit more and we get it closer to midseason, to me, this is between Mars Hill and Tusculum. I really don't think anybody else in that division is quite on their level. We kind of had some high hopes for Carson Newman this year. I think what we saw from them last week against Lenore-Rhine really kind of reset my expectations for what Carson Newman might be this year. So as I look at this starting to get a little bit further into the season, I think that division, that Mountain Division, is really all about Mars Hill and Tusculum.
Yeah, I agree, Chuck. It's funny what I think is most impressive is both of those teams have undergone quarterback changes, and we know how hard that can be. Is having to replace that position, particularly with somebody that hasn't necessarily been in the program. In the case of Mars Hill, they had a grad transfer come in, or a transfer come in rather, and so you start looking at that, and that just is difficult. Obviously, then Tusculum makes a change in the regular season, and those are just hard positions to fill, as we know. And the other thing on Carson Newman is they were kind of my sleeper in that side of the bracket, and they've I agree with you 100%. After that game against Lenore-Rhine last weekend, you almost have to hit that reset button and pump the brakes a little bit on what we've seen.
Yeah, I agree with you, but a great point about the quarterback position for both Tusculum and Mars Hill. And I kind of feel like Mars Hill had a little bit more to lean on as they adjusted to a new quarterback. We felt they'd have a pretty strong running game. And of course, they have one of the best defenses in the entire region, if not the country. So we kind of expected that they would be able to adjust and move forward with the new quarterback. For Tusculum, it was a little bit of a different story. Now, they have a good defense, normally a pretty strong defensive football team. Offense, they've just been very inconsistent for most of the past several years. I think that quarterback change, watching the first quarter at Wingate, made an immediate impression on me. Now, they ended up into a kind of in a defensive struggle there, but I was really impressed with what I saw with Matthew Palazzo at the quarterback position. I think that was a change that really benefited the whole team, really seemed to bring that offense to life. So I'm really excited to see what the Pioneers can do over the rest of the season.
Yeah, and I remember when we were texting back and forth a little bit during that game, and you were excited just in talking about, hey, they made a quarterback change, and the offense seems to be clicking a little bit now. So yeah, it'll be interesting to see how they finish out here. So let's flip it over. Let's take a look at that Piedmont division now. And you've got Lenore-Rhine, Newberry, and Limestone all at 2-0 in the league. Wingate and Barton are 1-1 right now in conference play. And I think maybe some surprises in there. I think if you watch D2 inside D2 football, you know that Lenore-Rhine was a heavily favored pick to win the conference, but Newberry, they lost a lot. They lost Mario Anderson to South Carolina. They lose some guys in the transfer portal and the graduation. So a lot of question marks for them. And then you look at Limestone. Didn't necessarily start out well, right? Go on the road, first game of the year, play another Gulf South team week 2, but they've rebounded nicely. And then Wingate, they've had to figure some things out offensively, a little bit different maybe than they were last year. That defense is just as solid as they've ever been. And then Barton, right? Barton right now is surprising some people. Yeah, they're 3-1, lost last week at Mars Hill, but I kind of think those expectations were probably the expectations last year. and we didn't really know what to expect this year. So a very competitive race in the Piedmont side of the division.
Yeah, I mean, I remember when the SAC first, told us what these divisions were going to be a couple of years ago. I just looked at the list, on paper, and I thought, wow, that is a really stacked division. That's going to be one of the most competitive divisions in all of college football, and it really has turned out to be that way, especially this year. And the thing is that we're coming up on midseason. I think there's a couple of teams in there that we still don't really know a lot about. Like, where do they truly stand?
Yeah.
Lenore Ryan has done everything that they need to do. They've taken care of all the business in front of them. They just haven't really faced an opponent that's on their level. And I think it just kind of leaves you with a few questions about what is the ceiling for that team this year? How good are they? And we're really just not going to know for at least another week or two. Um, they just haven't had competition that could really push them and show us what they're truly made of. I feel that the same is somewhat true for Newberry because they did take the loss to North Greenville. That's just a problematic matchup for Newberry. It always is, no matter how good or not good either of those teams is. It's just always a problematic matchup. The other opponents that they faced are teams that I really expected Newberry to be better than, and they were. They also struggled in some of those games. So I'm not blown away by what Newberry's been able to do this year, but 3-1 going into divisional play, they're still right where they want to be.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's the thing, right? We've gotten through a couple of weeks of non-conference play. Now we're sitting here getting into conference play, and we're still early, and we can't forget that, right? Like, yeah, we're through 4 weeks of the regular season, but we still have the meat of everybody's schedule still in front of them. And so we saw last year, you could start 0-2, and you could still make the playoffs. You could still make a run to the national championship. So for all of these teams, you're not out of it at this point.
Everything changes when you get into conference play and even the divisional play. I mean, we kind of glossed over a few of the teams in that Mountain Division because we don't really expect that they're going to be in the championship hunt. That doesn't mean that they won't get somebody. They may knock off somebody that we just don't think that they will, like Carson Newman getting Newberry last year.
Yep.
Might happen again this year. So there's going to be some surprise results in there. No matter what conference you're in, no matter how good it is or how respected it is nationally because you win national championships or not, once you get into conference play, it's always difficult. These teams just know each other so well. They see each other every year. It's always a gauntlet once you get into the conference play.
For sure. And we've talked a little bit about this, Chuck, but I wanted to kind of pick your brain a little bit. So Kataba hires Tyler Haynes, offensive coordinator from Shepherd, somebody that you follow the PSAC pretty closely. And he comes down here to Kataba. They're 2-2 on the season, but when you look at a lot of their stats offensively, particularly, they're on top. They've got one or two guys in all the stat categories, even on defense. What has that surprised you at all this year? Maybe the record, they started out well. Record aside, is this kind of where you expected them to be at this point in the season with the coaching change?
I think if you look at the schedule that they've faced so far, the results are exactly what I would have expected, and frankly, exactly what they should be. They played two teams early on that they matched up with favorably, played extremely well in those games, and they won both of them. Then you start to ratchet it up a little bit. You play, the Mars Hill game. It didn't go quite as well. And then, it does get a lot tougher once you get into the SAC play. So I'm not surprised that they lost the last two. But I don't see how you could be anything other than encouraged if you're part of the Kataba organization, if you're part of the alumni base there. I think you have to just be very encouraged by what you've seen. Offense was a real problem for them the last couple of years. They really just struggled for consistency, couldn't move the ball very well, struggled to find a quarterback that really fit the system. Tyler Haynes is a really good hire there. I was very excited the day that was announced. I knew that was a great pick for them. I knew he'd fit in well there. Obviously what he did at Shepherd was impressive, but even before that, he had prior head coaching experience. He's actually somebody who's been an offensive coordinator and a defensive coordinator. So obviously just knows the complete 360 of a football team. So I think you're going to have to give it a year or two. I think even later this year, they'll probably get somebody that we don't think that they're going to get. What's the ceiling for them? Is it, 3 wins, 4 wins, 5 wins? I don't know, but I'm already very encouraged by what I see there in Salisbury.
I agree. Like you said, they're going to get somebody late. I don't know who it's going to be. I think you've got to give them 2 to 3 years to get some of those recruits in. get in the transfer portal a little bit, get his guys in there, and figure out where those, some of those weaknesses are, those deficiencies, and like you said, offensively they were kind of stagnant the last couple of years. That's changed, and so it's exciting. And we often talk about it. A lot of times, the sack is better when Kataba football is playing well. Um, so yeah. So um, moving on now, I guess looking at this week, and we talked a little bit about it off air, Chuck. There's 4 games across the South Atlantic Conference that have pretty big implications, I think, for the season. And the first one is Mars Hill at Limestone. Next, then we have Barton at Tusculum, Carson Newman at Newberry, and Emory and Henry at Kataba. Are probably the 4 big games, I think, with pretty big implications here for the playoffs.
For sure. I have Mars Hill and Limestone as a featured game in my national column this week. I think this is a really interesting matchup. You've got kind of a red hot Mars Hill team playing very well on both sides of the ball, and you've got a rejuvenated Limestone team. I think, we kind of got down on them a little bit after the first 2 weeks, and, we thought, well, maybe they're going to be a little bit deflated. Really nice job recovering. They've won the last 2, played very well in both of those games. So it was really good to see them come out and show us that they really are a team that they could push to be in the playoffs again this year. So, that's a game that Limestone really needs that one if they want to be a playoff contender. We think about playoffs all year long. I'll freely admit it's too early to be talking playoffs. So we think about playoffs all
It,
year long.
yeah, no, it definitely is way too early to be talking about playoffs because half the teams we're talking about aren't going to be around at that point. But it's always fun to talk about it. And you're right, we all talk about the playoffs and what does it look like from the preseason to the selection show. So
Right.
for us, this is nothing
And
new. But yeah,
right. And if you're Limestone, if you want to get back to the playoffs for a second straight year, you've already got 2 losses on the board. You kind of have to approach every game the rest of the season as a playoff game.
absolutely, absolutely. You can't slip up. I mean, you've gotten your 2 now. You've got to go out there and I think probably have a little help along the way throughout the rest of the regular season. What about Barton at Tusculum? I think Barton was a team that we kind of were unsure of. We knew that they had the potential to be good and be explosive offensively, just weren't sure how it was going to play out.
Well, just what they've been able to do in such a short time building up that program has been very, very impressive. Just the fact that they're already a winning team. Love what they're doing there with that program. Tusculum had a really tough start to the season. They played an FCS opponent. We expected they'd lose that game. That is what it is. The road trip to Virginia State didn't go as well as I thought it could have. I thought that they could win that game, and that would have been a really nice W for them to get. Lost that one. Then they come back with a big win over Wingate, and that kind of really set them on their way. So now you've got 2 wins in a row. I think that Tusculum's a team that all of a sudden is playing with a lot of confidence. And we talked about the quarterback change. They're typically a good defensive football team. Going into last week, Barton playing at Mars Hill, we thought, Mars Hill's got the defense that's not going to allow Jordan Terrell to take over the game. And I think Tusculum has a similar defense that can do that. Will they be able to do it as well as Mars Hill? Maybe not, but I think that they're still a pretty good defensive football team and actually might have a little bit more offensive firepower to bring to the table too. So that's a really interesting matchup.
Yeah, I think you're pretty much on it right there with that. I think this is intriguing. I, there's just so much at stake, and I think for a lot of these teams, it's a playoff, every week, and we know that in the SAC. Emory and Henry at Catawba, Emory and Henry came in. They turned some heads last year, first year in Division II, first year in the SAC. A little bit of a slow start this year. And then Catawba, a team we just talked about. I think this is another game that can make or break somebody's season here in week 5.
I think that's it. This is kind of a game. The reason that you and I both kind of thought this has a lot of intrigue to it is
Yeah.
this is sort of something that might define where's the rest of your season going. Both those teams started 2-0. Now they're 2-2. We know that Catawba's still in a rebuilding phase. We know that Emory and Henry is still kind of new to Division II, but it only gets harder from here on out.
Yeah.
So this is
Yep.
really a game that both of those programs are going to look at as a must win.
And then the other big game, last big game of the weekend, Carson Newman at Newberry. Carson Newman, again, that was my sleeper team for this year. I thought they be careful now. They can turn some heads. And then Newberry, a team that surprised me a little bit. I think reloading some of their losses, and they're still here in this conversation on the top half of the Piedmont.
Yeah, I'm really curious to see what the outcome of this will be. I think it favors Newberry because they've done a good job of winning close games, and I've said for years on on my columns and on our shows, I like teams that can win close games, and I like teams that can win ugly games, and Newberry's really good at that. And Carson Newman just can't seem to really get into a consistent rhythm. We know that they've been trying to rebuild that program a little bit. They've reshaped the image of that offense, but they just cannot find the consistency that they're looking for. They get a good win here and there. They got one last year in this matchup. They get a good win here and there, but just putting that consistency together, it's really eluded them. Um, I don't see them winning at the graveyard. It's not a bad matchup for them. I think that they can do it, but like I said, Newberry just seems to be really well built to win these kind of matchups that end up being low scoring and maybe a little bit ugly.
No, for sure. Agreed 100%. I think Carson Newman, if they can string together some consistency, they did late last year. And so if they can get that going, this week, I think that they can set themselves up. I don't want to be talking playoffs, but I think they can set themselves up to make a run and potentially look at maybe beating some people here late. And then Newberry, just continuing what they've built on. Like you said, they win those gritty games, those tough, ugly games. It's hard to win in college football, and they do it. They find a way to do it every week. So this is again another matchup I think that's really really intriguing. And then last two matchups of the weekend, UVA Wise at Lenore Ryan and Erskine at Wingate, games that I don't think probably have as much intrigue for us and the rest of Sac Nation. But so that covers week 5 here in the SAC, Chuck. And so I'm going to ask this question because we talk about the playoffs all the time. And again, this is the way too early question, but I'm going to put you on the spot now. How many teams from the South Atlantic Conference do we think will be in contention? And how many teams do we think potentially have a seat at the table when the playoffs roll around? Not who, but how many?
I think we'll probably get as late as week 10 and maybe even week 11 having as many as 4 teams with a legit chance to make it. Um, Now we're not going to have 4 that make it from the SAC. I think 2 is a good expectation, and again, that kind of depends on how things shake out in the
Yeah.
other conferences as well. I think it's very likely that you'll have 3 teams that are worthy, and most likely 2 that would make it. Um, we've already got some teams that look like really strong contenders. We talked about Lenore Rhine. Mars Hill looks pretty good, but I think they're going to have to bring the offense up a little bit. They have had some struggle finishing drives. They run the ball really, really well. We've only got 3 rushing touchdowns this year. So kind of get a little bit better with finishing drives before I really have a lot of confidence that they're a playoff team, but the trajectory is there. And then we talked about Newberry, record wise, they're still right where they need to be. And, Wingett's had a couple stumbles, but, they have shown us a couple times that they can overcome that
Yep.
and make a late season run. So, after 4 weeks, the sample size is still a little too small. You could
Absolutely.
say half the league is still in contention.
Yeah.
Um, but I think just looking at where we've been the last several years, we're going to get pretty late into the season and still have 3 to 4 teams that are really strong contenders for it.
Excellent. Excellent. Well, Chuck, appreciate you taking the time this week. Hop on the Coach Poe show here and talk about South Atlantic Conference football as we look at week 5 here in the season.
All right, happy to be here, and hope to be back again soon.
Excellent. Well, y'all, I appreciate everybody tuning in this week for the Coach Poe show. As always, stay tuned to the Coach Poe show next week for more interviews, breakdowns, and looking forward to week 6 in the South Atlantic Conference. But as always, enjoy your football Saturday.